Hello once again, it's Matthew here from Matthew North Music. Thank you for watching my latest video. And as ever, if you like the kind of videos I make, be them about electronics, music, technology, old tech, or anything like that really, please hit the subscribe button. It really does help to keep things moving along. It's completely free, and if you click the little bell icon, then you'll be notified as and when there will be a new video. Now today we're going to talk about a newspaper, and it's not any ordinary newspaper. It's this one. Now this was printed in the year 2000, and it was to celebrate the millennium, and it was a compilation really of old photographs and articles from local newspapers in the southwest between the 1950s and the 1990s. And I thought we'd take a little dive into this because it's quite interesting to see kind of what was happening in sort of the area I grew up in over the years. So without further ado, we'll have a little flick through. Well, let's go and look at the first page then. And what delights will we have? Well, we've got a contents page here, and there's a little write-up there about introducing, and then we start to get to the sort of the sort of nub of what we have here. Now in this opening section, we've got a section here from the 400 Ballroom. Now this was a club in Torquay, and there's not that much actual footage or anything about the 400 Club, although if you ever saw the Ray Winston film that summer, you do see the 400 Club in there. Then we've got a little bit of Beatles memorabilia here, and then if we go down, we've got a reprint of the poster for when Cream played in Torquay Town Hall. So that would have been promoted by my old pal Lionel Digby. In fact, there's their LMD Entertainments Limited. And then we've got a Van Dyke Club poster here. Now, there's a lot of material about the Van Dyke Club online now because there's a very active group of people that post stuff regularly on Facebook. And there's actually been 2 books written about the Van Dyke Club, of which I own both of them. And they're both very good. And then here we've got a poster here for the Elephant Fair, which was a festival in St Germans in Cornwall. And this one was from '82. I think it ran from about 1981-ish to '85, I think was the last one. Now here we've got a section about the 1950s, and there's a couple of photos here. Ted Heath, the big band leader, Frank Ifield, the yodeling singer. There's a picture of Bill Haley and the Comets here. Not sure if they ever came down to the southwest or not. And there's a picture of Marilyn Monroe there. But on this side here, we've got a photo here from a jive club that happened in Torquay. And there's a little bit here about Chuck Berry. Now, of course, Chuck Berry did come down to the southwest on numerous occasions. The last time being in 2005, and I actually attended that show in Torquay at the Princess Theatre. And again, we've got more bits and bobs here about the 1950s. Not much in the way of photographs, though, taken locally. It's just more sort of a write-up, really. And then we've then getting to Cliff Richard, Joe Brown, and then we're moving into the 60s here. Now there's a photograph here, the Beatles, and there's a picture of Dylan and a bit of a write-up. Again, not much actually local. And now we're kind of getting into more sort of local territory here. Here's a feature about Gary Kane and the Tornadoes. They're a very well-known local band. I don't know where the venue is. I wouldn't be surprised if that wasn't Torquay Town Hall that photograph was actually taken in. Here we've got a photo of Alvin Stardust, who was originally called Shane Fenton. And in fact, he never actually sang on My Cuckoo. That was somebody else. But because Alvin Stardust was kind of a made-up name, and then the name a face had to be put to the name, so Shane Fenton became Alvin Stardust. On this side of the page, we've got stuff relating to the ABC Cinema in Plymouth, which hosted many great big names, Billy J. Kramer, Cilla, Chuck Berry, Roy Orbison, and of course later on the Beatles played there a couple of times, I think in '63 and '64. And in fact here we've got, on this side here, we've got a photo of the Beatles in Plymouth. And I think that's the Beatles there at the ABC Cinema. And on this side, we've got more stuff to do with the Beatles coming down to Plymouth in the 60s. I think it was 64. It might have been twice in 64. It might have been 64 and 65. And then again, more stuff about the Beatles. Now, these shots here, this was a press call where they're all smoking ciggies. And there is actually some footage of that, which you can probably find on YouTube. It's where they're talking about the upcoming election and how they travelled down on the B roads and such like. Again, more stuff about the Beatles in Exeter and Torquay, because obviously the local papers would have photographed the Beatles when they were down here quite a lot. So, you know, there's obviously pictures on file. There's some fans there. They've painted some pictures of the Beatles, fans waiting outside. Although looking at the clothing they're wearing, you know, you could be mistaken for seeing your gran at the supermarket. And then there's some pictures here for them. And obviously that's from the Magical Mystery Tour, so that would be September 1967. And although it says here, large crowds, Royal Hotel Plymouth in December 67. Well, no, it was September that they came down, but December's when, obviously, when the Magical Mystery Tour was shown on television. And there's some more Beatles fans there. It's quite Beatles heavy, but I mean, that's not surprising, really. Now we've got some more bits here. Again, more stuff to do with Beatles. And now we're moving on to the Stones. And there's some bits here about the Stones coming to the southwest. Nice photo there with Brian Jones playing a Gretsch. These photos are obviously later day publicity photos that you can sort of see here. On this side then we've got a bit more stuff that relates to Lionel. And up here is the great Lionel Digby with Screaming Lord Sutch and the Savages. One of the many times that they came down that he put them on. And down below here, now this is a photograph I've actually seen in real life, and that's a fully signed picture of the Who from one of the many times that Lionel put the Who on in Torquay Town Hall. One of which, I don't know if it's this one. Yes, it is. This poster here, one of the support bands is the Empty Vessels. Now that is Martin Turner from Wishbone Ash's prototype Wishbone Ash band, which Martin Turner on bass and vocals, his brother Glenn on guitar, and Steve Upton on drums. And in Martin Turner's book, he talks about this gig because John Entwistle had restrung his bass guitar and he threw his strings in the bin. And Martin took them out the bin and used them because they were round wound rotor sound strings, the like of which you couldn't get in shops down in the southwest. So Martin ended up by default being one of the first bass players in the southwest with flat round wound strings because he took them out the bin from John Entwistle of the Who. On this side we've got a section about Cliff Richard, including a photo here of him backstage at the ABC in Exeter in '64. And on the next page we've got some more photos of stars from the 60s in the area. For example, there's Jean Vincent in Torquay, and there's Dusty Springfield when she came down to the southwest, somewhere in Devon, probably Exeter. Now we're moving into the 70s, and we've got Mark Bolan there, John Travolta there, picture of Concorde, and of course the original lineup of the Sex Pistols. Now, the Sex Pistols came down to the southwest a couple of times, but they were banned from playing Torquay Town Hall. But they did instead end up doing 2 nights in Plymouth, although the second night didn't have a great turnout because the gig wasn't actually properly advertised. And now here we've got 2 pages all about the Van Dyke in Plymouth. There's some flyers here, including that famous King Crimson one. And then if I slide the paper along, you've got the really famous poster of David Bowie when he played Plymouth Guildhall. And that was from 71, I think, that poster. Or it might have been 72, using an earlier picture, I'm not sure. But that poster you actually find quite a lot because Greg Van Dyke, the son of Peter Van Dyke that ran the club, he had that poster reprinted in the 80s, so you know you do see them around. Well, they actually put some colour photos in the centre spread of this paper, and there's Robert Cray there from the short-lived Bishop Stock Blues Festival in Exeter, which I think only ran for 2 or 3 years. Again, there's another picture from Elephant Fair. Taj Mahal again at Bishop Stock. Gino Washington and the Ram Jam Band, and the artist there from Ukraine, and someone there from New Zealand. Okay, turning the page over, we've got some little feature there about Elephant Fair, which was this festival in St Germans in Cornwall. And there's Lord Eliot, who ran the fair and the festival until he passed away. And there's another picture there from Elephant Fair. Now, I'm going to show you the next page, and I'm going to give you a trigger warning now. There's something pretty horrific. The bottom half is okay. There's a thing about the Radio 1 Roadshow, Emperor Roscoe, and then there's a picture of Slade. Now, this paper came out in July 2000. That is 3 years after this next person, whose name I'm not going to mention, was arrested. And why on earth they thought you could put this person in a paper after he had been convicted of some hideous crimes, I do not know. But that was a major, major blunder by all the papers involved in producing this. Anyway, after that, we've got a section here about local bands, which is actually way more interesting than certainly that last person we saw. The Gift, I never saw them, but I certainly had heard of them, as they were around in the 70s. I think it was sort of a mod revivalist type band. And there's a band here from Oakhampton, the Avant Gardeners, again, before my time, but I think they were fairly well known. Down here is a feature of a local band called the Headless Chickens. Now, they were at Exeter University at the time, around about sort of 89, 90, 91-ish. But you might recognise him, and that indeed is Tom York of Radiohead. And they actually did record a track that got pressed onto vinyl, and that was this EP here, the Hometown Atrocities EP. Now, this actually had 2 different cover designs, and I did have this with the rarer cover design, although I sold that many years ago. But this was an EP that was produced by Hometown Atrocities Records, which is basically Dave Goodchild from The Cavern, who still runs The Cavern to this day. This is one of his EPs, and there was these cut out, make your own badge templates with it, and there was also like a little flyer booklet thing with the various bands inside, including the Headless Chickens, and yeah, a couple of little flyers inside, one for the Daylight Recording Studio in Honiton, which is probably where this was recorded. But there's the lineup of the band, and yeah, Tom York was the guitar player, and John Mattis, the violin player. He had a duo called Jiggers with Attitude, and they supported my band 33 years ago last week, and that's the actual record. So yeah, nice thing to have. Now, you can actually find these occasionally at not too ridiculous price, but if it's got Radiohead as part of the listing, then you know it's going to be silly money. But, you know, at the time of me making this video, it wouldn't be abnormal to find a copy of this for about 25 quid. Anyway, that's them, Headless Chickens. Now, in this section, obviously they're a bit short of any photographs to go with any local things. There's a picture of Michael Jackson there. He did once appear at Exeter City Football Club. Very embarrassing that was. Think about Frankie. Frankie never came down to the southwest. And then there's a feature here about Susie and the Banshees and The Cure, and they mentioned a couple of the dates that The Cure and Susie played down here. Like The Cure played at the top rank in Plymouth in 82, Elephant Fair in 83, 85 Cornwall Coliseum. They certainly played Cornwall Coliseum in 92 as well. Now here we've got a picture of the band King doing a signing in Torquay. I'm guessing that is in Sounds Records that was at the bottom of town, and they'd played at the 400 Club in Torquay, and my friend Martin was actually at that gig and said it was very good indeed. And I must admit, they're a band I've re-evaluated in more recent times, and I actually think they're pretty decent, but I didn't particularly like them at the time. Now down here, we'll forget that, and we'll just concentrate on here. And here we've got a write-up about Wishbone Ash, and this is from their reunion era, sort of 88, 89, because obviously they're wearing very 80s-tastic clothing there. Now we've got a little feature about a club in Plymouth called Clones, with one of their flyers. They were on Union Street, which used to be the sort of party and gig central of Plymouth, and now it's pretty much derelict the entire length of the road, sadly. But they've got bands like, you mentioned, like Joy Division, Cowboys International, Psychedelic Furs, OMD, Tourists, The Ruts, Punny Lux, The Mekons, Angelic Upstarts, UK Subs, The Chords, and all of those bands you can see for around between £1 and £2, which is, you know, pretty good value really. And then here they've got a little feature about Bob Geldof and Live Aid. Now I'm pretty sure the Boomtown Rats have played in the Southwest, but I couldn't tell you when. Now there's another section here about 80s pop stars, of which none of these photos were taken in the Southwest. Obviously Spandau Ballet, Phil Collins, Duran Duran, Adamant, Human League, Queen at Live Aid, the Police there. But again, none of these are actually local. Well, I guess you couldn't have a Southwest cliche without mentioning the Wurzels. Although, to be fair, at the time this photo was taken, Pete Budd of the Wurzels was actually living, in fact, he was living very close to where my parents lived, because he owned a pub called the Star Inn in Liverton in the 80s. And their current drummer is actually the sound engineer of one of my local venues. And here's another Cornwall Festival photograph, New Age Travellers and so forth. The Tregorny Tree Fair near Liskeard. I think that had been going for a long time. In fact, I think Queen played that in the early 70s. I'm sure that they played there. But yeah, another photo that obviously had been in one of the local papers. Now, here's a section about the Cornwall Coliseum. And this was a venue in St Austell. It's no longer there anymore, got knocked down. Now, a lot of artists used to do their warm-up gigs at the Cornwall Coliseum because it was so far away from London. They knew there wouldn't be any journalists there. So if something went wrong, they could, you know, it wouldn't matter. But, you know, you've got Status Quo, Meatloaf, Macca and Elton John there. I mean, The Who played there, Paul Young played there, as I mentioned, The Cure played there. Loads of people played the Coliseum. Now, there's a bit more local interest here. Al Hodge, who was a massive name in the Southwest. He was principally a guitarist, singer-songwriter, but he never really ventured that far out of the Southwest. He liked being in Cornwall. But he wrote Rock and Roll Mercenaries for John Parr and Meatloaf. And, you know, he's well loved and well respected to this day. There's a local festival once a year, Alstock, dedicated to Al Hodge. Below here are Joey the Lips. They're a local, basically they're a wedding band. And they do sort of commitment style soul music. And they're still touring, gigging to this day. Now here's a bunch more local bands, pretty much all Plymouth based, that I do remember. Weapons of Sound. This was basically a bunch of people hitting things, old oil drums and various other noisy things. They used to do all the festivals and stuff, and they were very loud. And then here we've got that's my friend Katie. So this is Shargov, who were a sort of soul-y, funky band from Plymouth. Katie goes by the name of Mama Tokus and does more sort of jazz-based stuff these days, but she's really great. Now there's Richard James and his band The Retreat. Now they used to have a residency at a club called the Cooperage in Plymouth, which was a really popular venue at the time. Sadly it closed down probably getting on 20 years ago now, and now the building is literally falling to bits. But in the 90s, you know, that was a pretty happening place. We played there quite a few times, and as I said, The Retreat used to have a residency there, and they were always really popular. And down here, Carillon, they were a Plymouth rock band with a capital R. And yeah, they used to play a lot around Plymouth. I think they did a show at the Pavilions once. and I think they travelled up to London a couple of times, and then various things happened, and then they disappeared again. And I think one of the band members got into a little bit of shtuck at some point. Now there's some stuff here, I think it's to do with the Radio 1 road show, and there's Kim Wilde, who presume was at a road show somewhere. Yeah, in Torquay, 1990. And there's a piece here about Abby Norman from a band called Madison, who I must admit I do not remember at all. Now, here we've got a feature here about when Genesis played the English Riviera Centre in Torquay. That was a warm-up show for the We Can't Dance tour in '92. And then here we've got a feature about the Better Days. They were a rhythm and blues band from Plymouth, and they produced a few singles in the 60s. Very, very collectible if you ever have any original Better Days records. I think they made a couple, and there's a few acetates, but the stuff has been reissued on CD since. Well, there's a feature here on Muse, and this was just around the turning point of them becoming big. I think they'd done their 2 EPs in 97, 98, round about that kind of time. I think by this point they'd been signed, and they probably by now were touring, and they were probably doing smaller headlining tours and then open for bigger bands. And I think probably about a year after this was when they kind of went stratospheric. But Andy Mosley interviews them there. I remember him from back in the day. And then we got some other stuff of people playing in Torquay, the Honeys, Texas there, Eternal, and Beautiful South. Now here we've got a mention about club culture. Now Plymouth was absolutely massive for sort of acid house and rave and stuff like that. Places like the Warehouse and the Academy were people used to travel from all over the country to go clubbing in Plymouth back in the late 80s, early 90s, which is something really hard to understand these days. Now, here's something interesting. There's a feature here about Coldplay. Now, if you didn't realise this fact, that Chris Martin's actually from Exeter, or he's from the outskirts, near Powdham Castle. In fact, he lived on the Powdham estate. Now, it's interesting that they've done a half-page feature about them being a hot tip for the future, because at the time of printing, they were a completely unknown band. But there's good reason why they were put in here as being a hot tip. And that's because Chris Martin's dad worked for the Exeter Express and Echo. And then the paper finishes with a few random photographs of various people at the Soundwaves Festival, which again was an event in Plymouth. It was like a free festival that went on for a few years, but then eventually I think the council stopped it actually, as I recall. But yeah, that was the end of it. And so yeah, that is what it was like according to the local papers in the southwest in the year 2000. Okay, well I hope you found that interesting, and if you did, please leave a comment. If you were at any of the events that are mentioned in here, or know anything else about stuff I've talked about, please leave a comment, because it's always good to spread the information. Anyway, hope you found this enjoyable. If you did, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next one.